If you want on the web to have your complete talk, you will have to start it again. Sorry.
Okay. No,
I was maybe too tight. You're right.
No, very briefly, I will just say that I will talk about the epistemology of history. So now I do some clarification. No, it's okay. About the vocabulary, because when I talk about history, is not what do historians do, but everything that comes in the past or what is our past. So history is not the same thing as historiography. When we talk about what historians do, those I mean by that historiography. And in the same time, when I talk about historical sciences, I mean all the sciences that study history. So there comes evolutionary biology, paleontology, geology, and the epistemology of historical sciences is the study of the reasoning, the common reasoning of all those sciences. When we talk about historical modalities, basically we don't have a very powerful view of what are modalities in this context. The scientific and historians and epistemologists do not explain clearly and define that. When we look at the literature, we find that determinism and necessitarianism is one of the main approach, but it's poorly defined. It's just the idea that when we try to understand history based on the epistemology of experimental sciences, we think that there is some laws, and with this idea, historian and scientific in those science comes to think that everything that has come place is necessarily what have to happen. But it's been like 30 to 40 years ago, there come a new approach of modalities in this literature that is more a contingent way of looking at history. There is two main reasons. The first one is the appearance of counterfactual history. That's led by some historians. One of those is Ferguson. Reasoning into history, meaning that they approach history by reasoning about what could have done Napoleon at that time, and they reopen the future from that point of view. The second reason that why a contingency has been a new way of looking at history is the work of Stephen Jay Gould, where he has proposed a thought experiment called replaying the tape of life, and his idea is that we can go in the past and reopen the future in the same way that do counterfactual history. Based on that, Ben Meehan has proposed a theory of modalities that try to capture the definition and the meaning of those modalities defined by historians and scientific that study history. Her idea is to think modalities as defined by the sensitivities of an outcome from the initial conditions. So necessity will be a result that is exactly the same type of result with different initial condition, contingency, and the difference will be different result with very similar initial conditions. And so her idea is that modalities comes in degrees and that can represent historical modalities. She presented her idea like that, and basically we can find that there are the initial conditions, different, exactly the same type of results, but on the different position, and it's the exact opposite. And we can see that depending on where comes the results, it's more or less contingent or more or less necessary. I think that's the main idea. That's basically what we find in the epistemology of historical sciences. But there is some few problems with this approach, I think. One of those is that when we think about history in terms of the results, we lose what Beatty called history itself, because if we look at only necessary results like the death of Napoleon, if we say that's necessary, we lose the way to come to his death. On the main, one of the other problems that we find and how to apply the theory of Benjamin theory to historiography and to some other historical results when we cannot quantify, we don't have these kind of possibilities. Another problem that I see there is that what are these initial conditions? Are not they possible worlds that we instantiate? And we can find other problem. I can say that Benjamin wants to have a theory that can be the result of necessity, but can assess causal judgment with counterfactuals. But one of the problems with the theory is that without possible world, we lose the semantic of counterfactuals, so she cannot analyze counterfactuals. So I propose to change, to abandon the theory and to go to look at other approach. There are few, one of those is Beatty, who proposed a counterfactual approach of scientific explanation as narratives. I will go more or less in the same way, but I will not focus on narratives. I will take an approach about more epistemological approach. Swain is more or less the same way, focusing on narratives, and there is another approach that I will not discuss due to Monteville, but constraints. So the main idea is to find what are historical modalities, looking at how can we find them in the epistemology of history. In that way, we can have a theory of modality that can explain, and we can reason about the epistemology, and after that, we can think about what is the metaphysics that scientifics needs to do historical reasoning. In that problem, I will focus on only one problem, because it's the problem of historical inference. So what is an historical inference? To all those questions, there is no agreement between in the literature, so I will try to give some little definition about what we can understand about what is historical inference. The first one is that when we know, we try to understand the past, we are in an epistemic situation where we know what is present to us and try to infer what the past was. So we're trying to rely on the traces of the present observables. So I will qualify the historical inference as this inference that comes from the present to the past. Okay. There is some few debate about the type of inference of what is exactly an historical inference, and I will focus on the first one of Cleland. Why? Because she's the main approach to historical inference, and because everybody after her has agreed to say that we can say that abductive or inference to the best explanation is one of the main reasoning in the historical sciences. There is some different approach. There is some more the more other way to understand it, but everybody agrees that Cleland gave one of the main approach. So the idea of Cleland's idea is to understand historical sciences as doing inference to the best explanation, as doing inference to the best explanation. She proposed to understand the method of historical sciences as the formulation of hypotheses that explain the traces that we see. The different hypotheses are in this disjunction, and every hypothesis formulate a particular past event, a token, as a possible common cause of all the traces that we see. I give here just a more a summary of her idea, and there you can find that I put the different events in a disjunctive way, because I think one of the idea that we can read from her is to understand historical reasoning not as inference to the best explanation, but more in the way of Alexander Bird Holmesian inference. I will show you how it works. So there is one main example in the literature, that is the extinction of dinosaurs that happened millions of years ago. And her idea, it's been proposed by Cleland, but everybody after her has discussed it, so I will present it really briefly. We know that dinosaurs disappeared a long time ago because we can see fossils layers in the stratigraphic layers, and the problem is what is the cause of this disappearance. So when we look at the scientific debate as Cleland discussed it, there is four possible hypotheses: disease, climate change, volcanic eruptions, or meteorite impact. And she, when looking at how scientifics assess the response, they try to find traces that will exclude some of the hypotheses. The first trace is the deposit of iridium that is compatible only with volcanic eruption and meteorite impact, and they are found years later shock quartz that is typically found or in nuclear bases or in meteorite impact. So there was only one hypothesis compatible with all this information. That was the fourth one, meteorite impact. Cleland has proposed something that is well known from in epistemology. It's to call the traces that exclude the other hypotheses a smoking gun. Okay. My idea is to show that in this kind of reasoning, there is a lot of moral reasoning that comes, and there is a problem because with that kind of moral reasoning, due to the epistemic situations where are the scientific, there seems to be one kind of reasoning that is needed is backtracking counterfactuals. That citation of Adrian Currie, who he explicitly says that when we reason, when scientific think about the past, they need some backtracking reasoning. If there weren't those stone caves now, then there would not have been tropical glaciation in the Neoproterozoic. So the problem is that in this literature, they do not want to work with possible word semantics. I will try to show that we can. And the problem is if we use possible semantics, then there seems to be a conflict with Lewis's idea that we cannot do backtracking arguments or backtracking counterfactual. So I will try to show that there is a way to find backtracking reasoning that can allow this kind of historical counterfactual needed by the scientific community of the historical sciences. What's the problem? So the problem comes from the semantics of counterfactual. Just a reminder, so Lewis's semantics is more or less the same that Stanaker one, is the idea that we have a space of possibility about possible world, an infinity one, and we will think about counterfactual as a quantification in that space, more or less. And counterfactual, there it is, it's a conditional of the form if A were the case, then C would be the case. And the Lewis's semantic framework is known as variabilistic analysis because when we have the package of the possible world, we will look at only the most similar worlds and we will evaluate the counterfactual in that world. So a counterfactual, it's true at all the phi worlds. If psi, it's also true at that world. It's not true if at one of the phi worlds, non-psi is true. So what's the problem? The problem comes with the notion of similarity. Because in the first analysis, there is no asymmetry of time, so we could do backtracking counterfactuals. But Lewis's do not want that for diverse reasons that I will expose. But we can see that we can approach the problem of similarity with one example, the example due to fine. In this semantic analysis of counterfactual, what Lewis wants is the type of counterfactuals that has to be true is the first one. If Nixon had pressed the button, there would have been a nuclear holocaust. And fine seems to say that if Nixon had pressed the button, there would not have been a nuclear holocaust, would be the more similar work. So that's a problem for Lewis. How can we understand the notion of similarity to take the right counterfactual? And the second one, that's the problem that we want to understand today, is the problem to know if we can do backtracking counterfactual in that analysis. It's the second one. If I hadn't presented today, I wouldn't have written the text, but I have written the text, so it seems that today is doing something to the past, and we don't want to allow that because we will lose the ability of openness and things like that. So what's the idea? Lewis's idea is to build an asymmetry of counterfactual dependence that will block this problem with similarity analysis. The idea is that we allow forward counterfactual, we allow backward counterfactual when the consequence is true, but we don't want counterfactual with false consequence, the last one. To do that, he will build his asymmetry of counterfactual dependence into other asymmetries, and I have to say something really briefly about that. The idea of the Lewis's idea is that it has a powerful importance in the epistemology of historical sciences, because the method of them depends on one of those asymmetry, meaning the asymmetry of overdetermination. So the idea is that when we look at the world and we see something, normally this thing will leave a plurality of trust. And we know that, and in a deterministic world, only this cause could have led to the traces, and so it suffices to know those traces to go back to the cause. And the asymmetry of the overdetermination is exactly that, because we have a plurality of trust, we have a plurality of determinants from the cause. So that's a good idea. It's a good way to understand the epistemology of historical sciences, but because they have really more determinants to know the past than in the other way experimental sciences that have only the causes. That's one of the Cleland's idea, but I don't think it works. I will not discuss that here. I just want to introduce semantics. One of the other asymmetry that you need when you want to do the counterfactual asymmetry of counterfactual dependence is the asymmetry of miracles, because when we do a counterfactual, if I said if there were no glass here, I put a miracle on this world to look at the more similar world. And if we understand well the other asymmetries, that leads to an asymmetry of miracles. I will show you with an example. This asymmetry comes to a system of weights that block the problem that we have seen, and here it's again the system of weight, but with the example. So when we look at Lewis's counterfactual, we understand that as it goes, there is only one miracle that is needed to make this counterfactual true. This miracle is Nixon had pressed the button, and here after that, if there is no problem with the engine and all of that, there would have been a nuclear holocaust. He disagrees with fine world, because on the fine world, you need at least 2 miracles to make that there have been no Holocaust. The first one is to do Nixon to press the button. The second one is to stop the nuclear holocaust that should have gone. And Lewis's concern is that due to the asymmetry of miracles, we will not have only one miracle there, but a lot of miracles to make sure that all the traces will disappear too. Okay. So the system of weight is a way of making clear the notion of similarity. And with the system of weight, you can have the right way to analyze forward counterfactual and to block backtracking counterfactual in exactly the same way. Why? Because when you do backtracking counterfactual, if you want to go back, you have to erase all the traces that have been done, so that makes a big violation of the laws. Okay. So, but the problem is that we need backtracking counterfactual if we want to understand the epistemology of the historical sciences. So we have to find a way to accept them. This way has been proposed by Justin Koo in his book The Meaning of If, and I will present shortly, briefly, an example. We understand forward counterfactuals at the moment of the antecedent is earlier than that of the consequent, and the example goes: I'm walking down the street and comes across a crowd applauding a man who is exiting a building. I learned that a few minutes earlier the man had been on the roof of the building, ready to jump. However, he decided to step back and go down the stairs, and a person in the crowd claims if the man had jumped, he would have died. That's a forward counterfactual. This example I take it from Justin Koo, and it seems that it's this counterfactual is true. The building is very tall. There is no safety net, so I accept that counterfactual. But Koo comes with another counterfactual with another context. Another person, the crowd, remarks that the man did not want to die. This person claimed that if he had jumped, there would have been no safety net. So he comes with the counterfactual. If the man had jumped, he would have lived. This counterfactual is a forward one, but with the new information, we have to do backtracking reasoning to accept that, because we know that there is no safety net, so he should have died. So the backtracking, to clarify the vocabulary, the backtracking is the difference produced by a later event on the earlier event. So to accept that, the second counterfactual, we need backward counterfactual. If the man had jumped, there would have been a safety net. And that is a backtracking counterfactual. There is a big problem we have seen with Lewis's, because we know that there was no safety net, so it seems not true. That Lewis's idea is that in the standard interpretation, what he calls a normal resolution of vagueness of similarity, the second counterfactual have to be false. What we want to do is to find a way, and the way that Koo proposed is to accept that the two interpretations are true, but the second one is necessarily the second one. We always come to the forward counterfactual, and when we want to assess backtracking interpretation, we have to put some context to go out of the standard resolutions. How we do that? That's just an example. That's just a representation of what we said. Justin Koo says that we can use. He has a whole theory of conditional, so I will not go into. I will just present his idea. Basically, that represents Lewis's idea. When we do a counterfactual, backtracking counterfactual, we try to change one with the antecedent one event, but it does not suffice to change the whole event, the result, because when we do the counterfactual, we put the miracle just before the antecedent that is after the event that we want to change. So whose idea is to put the miracle before not the time of the antecedent, but of the consequence. And now you can change the outcome of the event. That's the general idea. And you will find, so the whose idea is to put normal standard interpretation of the backward counterfactual. And I will try to go with that idea to understand what we mean by counterfactual in the case of historical sciences, more precisely in the case of backtracking counterfactuals. So if we assume Lewis's, we assume that the counterfactual that I've proposed Currie is false. We know that there has been tropical glaciation, so we cannot think that this counterfactual is true. But if we follow Q, we can put a miracle just before tropical glaciation, and it will be true. We will find the normal, the forward counterfactual if there had been if there had not been tropical glaciation, there would have been no dolostone layers. That's true. But the problem is that when we look at what we reason about the past, that seems not true, but because we lose the dependence of the trace to the past event. So if we think about the first counterfactual as an epistemic one, we will not have the problem dissolves. If I hadn't know about these traces, I wouldn't have known about this cause, but it's still not the right interpretation, I think. So I will try to show that there is some counterfactuals, that backtracking counterfactual that works in the Lewis's semantics without doing the earlier miracle of Alaku. Okay, the idea is that in the context of historical reasoning, the main problem is that we don't know what happened in the past. So we can use that to assess the backward counterfactuals. And I think that even in the Lewis's interpretation, we can find two possible interpretations that are equivalent. The first one is that it's false. That's the main interpretation for Lewis's semantics, because we have to think that the meteorite event occurred. But we're in a context in which one we don't know what happened. So we can access to a second counterfactual that is true. There was a volcanic eruption. The miracle occurs before the antecedents, but since the volcanic activity explain the data, there will be no limited backtracking. I can change only one of the parameter of the scenarios. I will not have to make big widespread miracles. The representation is this one on the right. The idea is that because we don't know what happened in the past, we have few causes, few hypotheses that will share a lot of the traces. So if I focus on the D1, that is the smoking gun, I will have to put only a small miracle to raise that, so that's only traces. That will not make a big miracle, and I can access to the counterfactual that I want without making too much trouble. Thinking like that, we can find that we understand the historical inference, the abductive way of understanding historical inference defined by Cleland, in a way with counterfactual reasoning. That is one example. And so the idea is that we can, if we do some counterfactual reasoning, we will find that we can have the symmetric of what we call smoking gun in the epistemological way. We'll call it, I don't know how we call it. It's the only trace that resists backward counterfactuals in this framework. That's the main idea. And that's the presentation, but I have no time to present all the ideas. The idea is that the smoking gun will be the necessary and sufficient conditions, and if it does, we can do the counterfactual in that, and we will change all the scenarios. If it's not, the scenarios will not change because we will have other hypotheses to explain all the data. That's the idea. So that's too long. One of the main ideas is that it comes to mind that we can understand the best hypothesis of in the historical inference as the hypothesis that produce the most backtracking when it's abandoned. That's the idea. Thank you.
Question, comment? Quite surprised. So
I have a question about the formulation of payment.
Yes.
Because it seemed to me that her formulation of necessity was too weak and contingency too strong.
Yes, but her idea is that this is like absolute necessities, but it comes in degrees. So if you find that when you repeat an experiment, you come to the same type of results with little difference, you have a kind of a necessity that it's not that stronger as an absolute necessity. I don't know if it's a good idea to understand modalities like that. I did not
There
assume
certainly
that.
is a modal notion. It's just that I don't think it's one that captures necessity.
Yeah,
Because it's too compatible with those things not happening that way, and that would undermine the necessity.
I totally agree. That's why I propose to understand necessity in terms of possible worlds, because I don't know what we can do exactly with that. We don't have the logic, we don't have semantics, and those kind of modalities seem just to rely on the chaotic an analogy with chaotic systems, and don't give the what we want to understand with modalities. But the problem is that when we try to use the possible world framework, scientists come to they're shaken by the idea of possible worlds, alternative worlds. That's why she has proposed that. But I don't think it's a good idea. We should try to make possible worlds compatible with the historical reasoning. That's the main idea.
Okay, but is there any necessity in historical reasoning in the first place?
It depends on what kind of science you're looking at. I think in historiography there is very few. You will not find one, but
look, even in biology, right, there is chance, right? A lot of
Yes.
the evolutionary mechanisms
Yeah.
are based on chance. Things obviously could have been otherwise.
yeah.
At any moment. So
One of the idea to use necessity is to think that we need some regularities to make some inferences. So it will be a kind of necessity that is not that stronger as nomological or logical, but it's the kind of necessity that we use in really small context. So we have some impossibilities, that's sure. So we should go on this way, looking at what can we understand by necessity, just to clarify the context of some event, not more.
thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, there was just a quick follow-up remark on this account of necessity. I mean, one thing to be said in favor of it is that it does give the right account of what some people have proposed as historical necessity. For example, think about Marx's historical materialism, saying, yeah, no matter how you start, at the end you're going to end up with socialism. Same with Hegel, like with historical idealism, yeah, you're going to end up like Hegel, basically. Or in thermodynamics, it's a sense in which technical thermodynamics is historically necessary, that the vast majority of initial conditions lead to the maximum entropy state in the end. So perhaps it's not everything that you want from the notion of necessity, but in this narrowly historical context, strikes me as a right of thinking.
Yeah, I think that's why it has some some results. So people liked it at the first place. I think exactly for those reasons, because we can find some of the theological reasoning in history without the theological part. The problem is that after that, it's a nice representation of those kind of things, but we cannot assess, we cannot explain why, how historians use modalities to make some particular inference and some particular reasoning. So that's a big problem. She has changed her account in the last past 2 years, but it's still unpublished. So I don't know if there's solutions now. But thank you.
So thank you so much for the talk. I do have another concern, I don't know, question. Sorry, it's a kind of a following up. Concerning the image after this slide, in which this idea of necessity, if we think about evolution, could be only convergence. It's not necessary to think about this strong necessity. I don't know what you think. And the other stuff is that maybe here we can have a weak notion of necessity concerning the result, because even if we have different starting points, the result will be the same. But there could be also another kind of necessity that concern more processes. And in here we don't have this case of necessity. It seems that the necessity here is only about results.
Yeah.
So what do you think about this dialogue between necessity, contingency, result, and I don't know, it's only a curiosity. I don't know if you're...
No, that's the kind of problem that BT has assessed with the Benjamin theory. So that's a really big problem for her. I don't know how she can use that. The problem for me is that can we find an explanation of convergence phenomena in biology or things like that within the possible framework? And that's a problem to me. Maybe if we understand the type of reasoning that historians do when they do analogy reasoning, we will find that the same or approximately the same possibility can be found at a time t1 and at another time t+1, and we will find convergence there only with the notion of similarity. I'm quite not sure that we can find this kind of explanation with the Benjamin explanation. Yeah, that's true.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I will just add a comment because Charles Penson and I, we are developing something to correct the Ben for biology, and you need a changing phase space and not a fixed change phase space. If you want to take into account the surprising aspects of time of biology, you need to have at least allow the possibility that the phase space is not stable, which I don't know how to formalize well yet.
Yeah, that covers.
But that would go beyond, because here she presumed that the phase space of historical events is completely fixed, and you move in it, like an attractor, and that seems killing the creativity of biology or human history. Of course, if you're a Marxist or Hegelian, you're not bothered about that, but. There's not a lot of Marxists and Hegelian around these days.
One of the problems to understand what are those initial conditions, what is the space of possibility, and that she cannot give that.
If it's very short,
It's about what you said, and how would you explain regularities and historical trends in this context?
in my vision,
Or
I'm not giving the talk, it's this guy.
No, indeed,
How would you explain regularity?
Yeah, that's one of the problems with phase semantics that comes with multi-relats to the same idea, more or less, and the idea is to find the constraints to build up some constraints of a biological possibility that will evolve with the new the evolution of the biological possibility. I'm not sure that works. I think that we should understand it more in the possible world semantics. There it comes already in the package. We have regularities just there, so it's pretty simple. We'll just change the space. We'll move on the space to include the new possibilities. Thank you.